Toshiba. You know the name. It probably makes you think of your first laptop, maybe a TV, just some piece of solid, reliable tech. For decades, they were this unstoppable force, a real symbol of Japan's economic power. But then, in 2023, after 74 years on the stock market, they just vanished. So how does a giant like that actually fall? Well, it's a heck of a story, filled with political scandals, massive corporate lies, and a multi-billion-dollar bet that went about as wrong as it could possibly go.
But our story doesn't start in some boardroom in Tokyo. Nope, it starts right on the steps of the US Capitol. The date is July 2nd, 1987. And let me tell you, the mood is angry.
You heard that right. We're talking about United States congressmen out in public taking sledgehammers and just smashing the Toshiba boombox to pieces. It was this wild, shocking, and very public display of anger, and it was all aimed at one of the world's most respected companies.
So you have to wonder, how did Toshiba, this global icon, end up here? That moment, right there, was a preview of a fall that would take decades to fully play out. To really get how they collapsed, you first have to understand just how incredibly high they rose.
So, let's rewind the clock. For most of the 20th century, Toshiba wasn't just another company. It was a pillar of Japan's post-war economic miracle, a true tech samurai.
I mean, their story goes all the way back to 1875. Started by a couple of visionaries they literally called the Edisons of Japan. Eventually, these two companies merged and Toshiba was born. For the next 100 years, they were just relentless innovators. And it all led up to 1985 when they did something that changed the world. They gave us the first mass-market laptop. But their incredible growth wasn't just about having great ideas. It was supercharged by this uniquely Japanese way of doing business.
And that secret weapon was called the kairetsu. This was really the bedrock of Japan's corporate power after the war. A kairetsu is basically this web of companies, all connected because they own small chunks of each other. And they're all centered around one powerful bank. It made them a corporate fortress. The easiest way to think about it is like this. Imagine 4 friends. One makes cars, one's a banker, one's an insurance, and one's a trader. They all buy a little bit of each other's companies. The banker friend gives them all cheap loans to get bigger, and they all make a point to buy from and support each other. This system shielded them from hostile takeovers and market shocks, so they could think way into the future and expand into new areas without much fear. It's how Toshiba got into everything from memory chips to nuclear reactors. But that fortress, it had a fatal flaw hidden inside. The first big crack in the empire wasn't a bad product or a competitor. It was a lie. A massive, 7-year-long lie that came directly from the top.
So in 2015, the truth comes out. The world finds out that Toshiba had been systematically faking its profits. And the number was just staggering. They had overreported their earnings by almost $2 billion.
And this wasn't just some small accounting error. After the 2008 financial crisis, the top brass started setting these impossible profit goals. They basically told their division managers, "I don't care how, just make it happen." This created this incredibly toxic culture of obey or be punished. And somehow, their own auditors completely missed the fraud for 6 years straight. The scandal was a huge blow, but believe it or not, an even bigger, deadlier punch was already in the air.
While everyone was focused on the accounting mess, Toshiba's biggest gamble ever, this massive bet on the future of energy, was about to blow up in the most catastrophic way imaginable.
Let's jump back to 2006 for a second. Toshiba is at the absolute peak of its power, and it decides to go all in on nuclear energy. They shelled out a mind-boggling $5.4 billion to buy Westinghouse, a huge American company that builds nuclear plants. This was supposed to be the move that secured their future for the next 100 years.
What seemed like a sure thing just fell apart with shocking speed. Only 5 years after they bought it, the Fukushima disaster happened, and suddenly nobody in the world wanted new nuclear power. Then, Westinghouse's projects in the US started spiraling out of control with billions in cost overruns. By 2017, the whole thing was bankrupt, sticking Toshiba with a bill for almost $10 billion in debt. The one strategic move that was supposed to be their crowning achievement, well, it turned into the very thing that signed their death warrant. The company was now staring down the barrel of complete and total collapse.
So, with billions in debt from the nuclear fiasco and their reputation totally shot from the accounting scandal, Toshiba's leadership had this horrifying choice to make. either declare bankruptcy for the whole 140-year-old company or start selling off their most precious assets just to stay alive. They chose to sell. And just like that, the great Toshiba fire sale began. Their super profitable medical division, gone. Their crown jewel, the world-leading memory chip business, sold off. The iconic TVs and appliances handed over to Chinese competitors. But just look at that last line. The entire laptop and PC division was sold for a measly $36 million.
Just let that sink in for a second. The company that literally invented the modern laptop watched its entire legacy in that field get sold off for what is basically a rounding error in the world of corporate finance. It was just an absolutely jaw-dropping fall from grace.
What was left of Toshiba was pretty much just a hollowed-out shell. After a couple of failed takeover bids, a Japanese investment fund finally bought what was left, and in December 2023, they officially took it off the stock market. That was it, the end of Toshiba as a public company. The samurai had fallen. That here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. While Toshiba was busy destroying itself, one of its oldest partners, thousands of miles away in Egypt, was paying very close attention. The El Arabi Group, a company known for decades as Toshiba El Arabi, saw what was happening and wrote a completely different ending for themselves.
You see, the folks at El Arabi saw the writing on the wall years before the collapse. They knew how risky it was to build their entire company on a brand that they didn't actually own. So what did they do? They diversified. They brought in other big names like Sharp and Sony. And crucially, they built their own brand Tornado as a safety net. So when Toshiba finally did go under, El Arabi was totally prepared.
It really is the classic story of the rigid oak tree that shatters in a storm versus the flexible bamboo that just bends and survives. Toshiba's pride in its refusal to change was its doom. El Arabi's foresight and its willingness to adapt is why they're still here.
And that really brings us to the tough, unavoidable lesson from the whole Toshiba saga. It took more than a century to build this icon with countless game-changing products, but all it took was one terrible bet on nuclear power, made even worse by a culture of lying, to bring the whole thing crashing down.
So I'll leave you with this to chew on. Imagine it's 2015. You're the CEO of Toshiba. The accounting scandal just hit the news, and you know this nuclear disaster is about to boil over. Do you make the painful call to sell your best, most profitable divisions to pay the bills and make sure the company in some form survives? Or do you gamble, hold on to everything, and try a massive, risky restructuring that could either save the day or drive the company into total bankruptcy? What would you do?